My name is Elijah Brooks, and the irony isn't lost on me. After years of deployments, high-stakes missions, and living in environments where tranquility was a distant memory, I find myself in a suburban cul-de-sac, battling not enemy combatants, but a persistent neighbor with a penchant for unauthorized hot tub use. Retirement from Delta Force was supposed to be about reclaiming peace, about unwinding the tightly wound coil of tension that had become synonymous with my existence. It was about quiet mornings with a strong cup of coffee, tending to my small vegetable garden, and most importantly, indulging in the therapeutic embrace of the custom-built jacuzzi I'd sunk a considerable amount of my savings into. The jacuzzi was more than just a luxury. It was a sanctuary, a place where the aches and pains accumulated over years of rigorous training and combat could finally find some relief. The carefully calibrated jets massaged away the phantom pains of old injuries, the warm water soothed the deep-seated anxieties that still lingered beneath the surface. I envisioned myself spending countless evenings beneath the stars, letting the swirling water wash away the memories of distant battlefields. The reality, however, was proving to be far less idyllic. My property backed onto that of Patricia Miller, or as she was more commonly referred to, Karen, was the quintessential suburbanite, complete with a meticulously manicured lawn, an oversized SUV, and an unwavering sense of entitlement. She was the type of person who believed that the rules applied to everyone else, but were merely suggestions when it came to her own desires. From the moment I moved in, I'd noticed her penchant for boundary-testing behavior. Whether it was complaining about the height of my hedges or questioning my choice of exterior paint color. But nothing could have prepared me for her audacity. When it came to my jacuzzi, the first encounter was almost comical. I'd left the side gate ajar while I was working on the landscaping, and I returned to find Karen, fully clothed, dipping her toes into the bubbling water. She claimed she thought it was a community amenity, and that she was simply testing the temperature for the benefit of all the neighbors. I politely informed her that it was private property, and asked her to refrain from entering my yard without permission. I even offered, in a moment of misguided generosity, to let her know if I was ever having a jacuzzi gathering. I genuinely believed it was a simple misunderstanding, a case of suburban curiosity getting the better of her. I reinforced the gate with a sturdier latch, assuming that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. The second intrusion was far more deliberate and infinitely more infuriating. I was inside, settling down for the evening, when I heard the unmistakable sound of spa music drifting through the open windows. I initially dismissed it as coming from another neighbor, until I realized the music was far too close, far too distinct. I cautiously approached the back door and peered out into the night. There she was, Karen submerged in my jacuzzi, a wine glass perched precariously on the edge, a Bluetooth speaker blasting some new age relaxation playlist. She was luxuriating in my sanctuary, treating it as if it were her personal spa. When I confronted her, she simply rolled her eyes and declared that the jets were therapeutic, and that she needed them for her circulation. She acted as if I was the one in the wrong, as if I was somehow inconveniencing her by asking her to leave my own property. The audacity of it was astounding, so I was seething, but I maintained my composure. I explained, in no uncertain terms, that she was trespassing, and that if she didn't leave immediately, I would be forced to call the authorities. She reluctantly climbed out of the water, dripping and indignant, and muttered something about overreacting as she sauntered back towards her own yard. I immediately secured the gate with a heavy-duty padlock and installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter, hoping to deter any future incursions. But Karen, it seemed, was not easily deterred. The subsequent weeks became a constant battle of wits. I started noticing subtle signs that Karen was still trespassing. Small, almost imperceptible changes in the arrangement of the towels I kept by the jacuzzi, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, the occasional rogue leaf floating in the water that didn't match any of the trees in my yard. Even discovered a soggy paperback romance novel nestled amongst the bushes, a telltale sign that she had been indulging in some surreptitious spa sessions while I was away. The final straw came when I found a fluffy white bathrobe, unmistakably not mine, draped over the jacuzzi cover. This was no longer a simple case of misguided curiosity. This was a blatant disregard for my property and my privacy. I tried reasoning. With her, I approached her one afternoon as she was tending to her flower beds, hoping to have a civil conversation. I explained that her trespassing was making me feel uncomfortable and violated, and that I simply wanted to enjoy my jacuzzi in peace. She feigned ignorance, claiming that she had no idea what I was talking about. She accused me of being paranoid and suggested that I was imagining things. When I presented her with the soggy paperback and the fluffy white robe, she scoffed and claimed that they must have been left by someone else. She refused to acknowledge her actions or offer any apology. It was clear that she was emboldened by my attempts at diplomacy and that she had no intention of stopping her trespassing. I felt like I was losing control of my own property. The jacuzzi, which was supposed to be my sanctuary, had become a source of anxiety and frustration. I was constantly on edge, wondering when Karen would strike next. I considered installing security cameras, but I didn't want to turn my backyard into a surveillance state. I thought about filing a formal complaint with the homeowners association. I knew that would only escalate the situation and create even more animosity within the neighborhood. I even contemplated confronting her husband, but I didn't want to involve him in our petty feud. I felt like I had exhausted all of my options. The conventional methods of dealing with a trespassing neighbor had failed. I was left with a sense of helplessness and a growing resentment towards Karen's blatant disregard for my boundaries. It was then that my training, my years of experience in unconventional warfare began to creep back into my thinking. I realized that I was approaching this problem with the wrong mindset. I was trying to solve it with logic and reason, but Karen was operating on a completely different plane of reality. She was driven by a sense of entitlement and a complete lack of respect for the rules. To deal with her effectively, I needed to think outside the box, to employ a strategy that was as unconventional as her behavior. I needed to approach this situation not as a suburban homeowner, but as a retired Delta Force operator. I needed to devise a plan that was silent, strategic, and ultimately final. The first step was to gather information. I started observing Karen's routine, noting her comings and goings, her patterns of behavior. I spent hours watching her from my upstairs window, meticulously documenting her movements. I learned that she typically trespassed in the early morning, before anyone else was awake, or in the late evening after everyone had gone to bed. She always entered through the side gate, carefully avoiding the motion sensor lights. She always brought a towel and a book, and she always spent at least an hour soaking in the jacuzzi. With this information in hand, I began to formulate my plan. It needed to be something that would deter her from trespassing again without causing any lasting harm. It needed to be something that would send a clear message that her behavior was unacceptable. And it needed to be something that would be completely untraceable back to me. The key, I decided, was to make the jacuzzi experience unpleasant enough that she would never want to repeat it. I needed to create a deterrent that was subtle, non-toxic, and ultimately unforgettable. My thoughts drifted back to my training, days to the countless simulations and exercises we had endured in preparation for chemical and biological warfare. I remembered a specific mineral blend that was used in training exercises to simulate the effects of irritants on the skin. It was completely harmless, but it caused intense itching for several hours. Mimicking the discomfort of exposure to fiberglass insulation, the itching was so intense that it was nearly impossible to ignore, but it left no lasting damage. It was the perfect solution. I contacted a former colleague who still had connections within the military supply chain and discreetly ordered a small quantity of the mineral blend. He raised an eyebrow at my request, but he didn't ask any questions. He knew that when it came to my past life, I preferred to keep things private. Within a few days, the package arrived, carefully wrapped and unmarked. The mineral blend was a fine white powder, almost indistinguishable from ordinary baking soda. I carefully measured out the appropriate amount, just enough to cause the desired effect without posing any risk to Karen's health. I mixed it in with a small amount of water to create a slurry, and then I carefully poured it into the jacuzzi filter system. I made sure to seal the cover tightly so that the powder would be evenly distributed throughout the water when the jets were turned on. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. I knew that Karen wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of the jacuzzi for long. She was addicted to the feeling of entitlement, to the sense that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I estimated that she would attempt to trespass again within a few days, perhaps even the very next morning. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the inevitable. I cleaned the jacuzzi area, removing any traces of my activity. I checked the security cameras, ensuring that they were functioning properly, and I mentally rehearsed my plan, anticipating any possible contingencies. I wanted to be prepared for anything, just as I had been during my years in Delta Force. That evening, I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep well. My mind was racing, replaying every detail of my plan. I kept second-guessing myself, wondering, if I was going too far, is it really necessary to resort to such drastic measures? Was there a more peaceful way to resolve this conflict? But then I remembered Karen's smug face, her unwavering sense of entitlement, her complete disregard for my property and my privacy, and I knew that I was doing the right thing. I was defending my boundaries, protecting my peace of mind, and sending a clear message that her behavior was unacceptable. I finally drifted off to sleep, but I remained in a state of heightened awareness. I was ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. I awoke early the next morning. Before the sun had even begun to peek over the horizon, I crept out of bed, careful not to disturb my wife, and made my way to my upstairs office. From there, I had a clear view of my backyard, including the jacuzzi and the side gate that Karen had been using to access my property. I grabbed a pair of binoculars and settled in for a long wait. The minutes ticked by slowly. The sky gradually lightened, and the sounds of the neighborhood began to stir. Birds chirped, dogs barked, and the occasional car rumbled down the street. But there was no sign of Karen. I started to wonder if my plan had failed. Maybe she had gotten suspicious. Maybe she had seen me working on the jacuzzi filter the previous day. Maybe she had simply decided to give up on her trespassing. But then, just as I was about to lose hope, I saw her, emerged from her back door, dressed in her usual attire, a bathrobe, slippers, and a towel draped over her shoulder. She moved with a stealthy grace, as if she were on a secret mission. She approached the side gate, carefully avoiding the motion sensor lights, and quietly unlocked the padlock. She slipped through the gate and into my yard, her face illuminated by a smug expression of triumph. I watched as she approached the jacuzzi, her steps quickening with anticipation. She placed her towel and her book on a nearby chair, and then she turned on the jets. The bubbling water filled the air with a soothing sound, and Karen stepped into the jacuzzi with a sigh of contentment. I held my breath, waiting for the mineral blend to take effect. At first, nothing happened. Karen simply closed her eyes and luxuriated in the warm water. But then, after about 3 minutes, I saw her start to fidget. She scratched her arm, then her leg, then her back. Her movements became more frantic, more agitated. Her serene expression transformed into one of discomfort and irritation.
Ow.
She began to squirm in the water as if she were sitting on a bed of ants. And then, finally, she leaped out of the jacuzzi with a howl of anguish. She stood there, dripping and scratching, her face contorted in a mask of misery. She flailed her arms, kicked her legs, and twisted her body in an attempt to relieve the unbearable itching. She looked like she was being attacked by a swarm of invisible insects. I could barely contain my laughter. My plan had worked perfectly. Karen was experiencing the full force of the mineral blend, and she was clearly regretting her decision to trespass. She ran around my yard in a frenzy, scratching at her skin with increasing desperation. She tripped over the garden hose, stumbled over the lawn furniture, and nearly fell into the fish pond. She looked like a character in a slapstick comedy routine. Finally, she managed to regain her composure and stumbled towards the side gate. She fumbled with the padlock, her hands shaking with frustration, and then she burst through the gate and disappeared into her own yard. I watched as she ran towards her back door, still scratching and howling, her bathrobe flapping behind her like a tattered flag. The next morning, I ventured out into my backyard to assess the damage. The scene was a testament to Karen's frantic escape. Her white bathrobe lay discarded in the bushes, looking like a forgotten relic of a chaotic battle. The garden hose was tangled and twisted. The lawn furniture was overturned. The fish pond was filled with leaves and debris. It was clear that Karen had not had a pleasant experience. I carefully collected the bathrobe and disposed of it. In the trash, I straightened the garden hose, righted the lawn furniture, and cleaned out the fish pond. I wanted to erase any trace of her trespassing, to reclaim my yard and restore it to its former state of tranquility. I also took the opportunity to thoroughly clean the jacuzzi. I drained the water, scrubbed the interior, and ran the filter with a high concentration of chlorine. I wanted to ensure that every last trace of the mineral blend was removed, and that the jacuzzi was once again safe and inviting. As I was cleaning, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. My plan had worked perfectly. Karen had been effectively deterred from trespassing, and I had managed to achieve my goal without causing any lasting harm. I had defended my boundaries, protected my peace of mind, and sent a clear message that her behavior was unacceptable. I knew that some people might view my actions as excessive or even vindictive, but I felt justified in what I had done. Karen had repeatedly violated my property and my privacy, and she had refused to acknowledge her wrongdoing. She had left me with no other option but to take matters into my own hands. In the days that followed, I noticed a distinct change in Karen's behavior. She avoided eye contact whenever we crossed paths. She kept her blinds drawn, and she no longer tended to her flower beds with the same enthusiasm. She seemed to be actively avoiding me, as if she were afraid of what I might do next. I even saw her crossing the street one day when she spotted me walking my dog. It was clear that she had learned her lesson. She was no longer the smug, entitled suburbanite who believed that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. She was now a humbled, wary neighbor, afraid to step out of line. The jacuzzi remained untouched. The side gate remained locked, and my backyard was once again a peaceful sanctuary. I started spending my evenings soaking in the warm water, letting the jets massage away the lingering tension in my muscles. I watched the stars twinkle in the night sky, and I listened to the gentle sounds of the neighborhood. I felt a sense of contentment wash over me, a sense of finally being able to relax and enjoy my retirement in peace. Life in the suburbs settled into a new normal. The drama with Karen faded into a distant memory, a cautionary tale that I occasionally recounted to amused friends. The simmering animosity that had permeated the neighborhood gradually dissipated, replaced by a cautious but palpable sense of civility. I even found myself exchanging polite nods with Karen on the rare occasions when our paths crossed, although her eyes still held a flicker of apprehension. The jacuzzi regained its status as my personal oasis, a place of refuge from the stresses and anxieties of everyday life. I experimented with different essential oils, creating custom aromatherapy blends that enhanced the therapeutic benefits of the warm water and jets. I invested in a high-quality sound system, filling my backyard with the soothing melodies of classical music and nature sounds. I even started inviting friends over for jacuzzi parties, sharing the joy and relaxation that I had previously kept to myself. My vegetable garden flourished, providing me with a steady supply of fresh, organic produce. I spent hours tending to my plants, finding a sense of peace and fulfillment in the simple act of nurturing life. I joined a local hiking club, exploring the scenic trails and breathtaking vistas of the surrounding countryside. I rediscovered my passion for photography, capturing the beauty of nature with my camera. I even started volunteering at a local animal shelter, providing care and companionship to abandoned and neglected animals. My retirement had finally transformed into the idyllic existence I had always envisioned. The suburban cul-de-sac that had once felt like a battleground had become a haven of peace and tranquility. The jacuzzi, which had been the source of so much conflict, had become a symbol of my hard-earned freedom and my unwavering commitment to protecting my boundaries. I learned a valuable lesson during my encounter with Karen. I learned that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that are unexpected and unconventional. I learned that it's important to stand up for what you believe in, even when it means challenging the status quo. I learned that even in the most mundane of settings. The skills and experiences that I had acquired during my years in Delta Force could still be valuable assets. But most importantly, I learned that true peace comes not from avoiding conflict, but from confronting it head-on and resolving it in a way that preserves your integrity and protects your well-being. As I sat in my jacuzzi one evening, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I couldn't help but smile. I had faced my share of challenges in life, both on and off the battlefield, and I had emerged victorious time and time again. I was a survivor, a warrior, and a retiree who had finally found peace in his backyard.